stylistic choice, but apparently it really bothers a lot of people. What the fuck are you guys doing? What the fuck are they all doing? Sit still! I'm stuck. I'm stuck between girls. They've boxed me in! The girls are closing. Guys! Get out the fucking way! So I have a fascination with really bad JRPGs. And when I say really bad, I don't mean like, ooh, I didn't like Final Fantasy XIII. No. I mean JRPGs where everything about the execution is so bewildering you assume you're the victim of an elaborate prank because you can't possibly understand how things ended up this way otherwise. With that auspicious intro, I'm here to tell you that, friends, Loop8, The Summer of Gods is a tremendously convincing entry in this field, gifted to us in the current year, at time of speaking anyway. Now, obviously, this game is bad. The title and this intro imply as much, but there was actually every reason on the run-up to release to think otherwise. Loop8 is not a game that is bad for lack of effort or lack of interesting ideas. It's a genuine effort. It's also a complete mess. For the sake of ethical disclosure, I actually received a copy of this game from the publisher. This probably wasn't the coverage they were hoping for as a result of that decision, but you know, sometimes things turn out this way. So firstly, let's establish a bit of background context for why anyone might have cared about Loop8 in the first place, because believe it or not, I did not play this game just to crap in its cornflakes. There's a genuine pedigree here. Loop8 was billed, at least in Japan, as a spiritual successor to PlayStation 1 game Gun Parade March, and was even helmed by the same designer in Scenario Rider. Gun Parade March was never released outside of Japan, but it acquired a cult status inside the country for its novel and ambitious gameplay systems, revolving around a group of high school students drafted to fight against alien invaders in cool robots while still trying to live normal teenage lives. Also, Gun Parade's intro is sick, so let's just take a moment to appreciate this. Oh yeah, that's the good stuff. That's PS1 as hell, man. Sounds like a very anime premise, but Gun Parade March's edge and what gave it that following is that how the game develops is largely systematically driven rather than following a linear story. Relationships develop dynamically between characters based on your actions and the AI. Characters can be killed in combat, which does just remove them from the game flat out, and above all, it's a game that's good at generating water-cooler story talk where you and a pal could compare notes about how differently your experience of trying to keep these kids alive turned out. I'm being a bit broad in my description here in the interest of not bloating the video, since Loop8 shares a lot of the same ideas, and Gun Parade March is an extremely dense game that could serve as an entire separate video all on its own. But my point is that a spiritual follow-up to a game like that had a lot of potential. Gun Parade March was popular enough to have a manga and anime adaptation, so among a small niche of people, there was interest and hype for Loop8. In Japan, at least. On the western side of things, this game was doomed from the start. I'm actually surprised this got localized at all given the context, but anyway. With it releasing to an abysmal Metacritic, making it one of the worst reviewed JRPGs in 2023, and low enough to be in the same general score band as stone-cold RPG Kusoge classics like The First Neptunia Game and Time in Eternity. God, remember Time in Eternity? What the hell happened, and how did it earn a score that low? Loop8 has a somewhat bewildering intro that really sets the tone for the kind of jank we're dealing with going forward. You play as Nini, a young boy who fled to space due to the Earth being largely destroyed by a race of demons called the Kegai. However, an accident aboard the space colony that we are never shown kills Nini's family, prompting him to return to one of the last pockets of Earth still inhabited, a small, sleepy, 1980s-style Japanese town called Ashihara. From here, the game rips through a breakneck tutorial of its mechanics, like spending time to increase stats, going to class, talking to other characters to improve your relationships, and investigating the environment to receive blessings which improve your stats permanently. As this takes place, a couple of comments are made about the looming threat of the Kegai that tend to then be swiftly moved on from, which manages to immediately confuse the sense of stakes involved, and it is in fact never really clear if other members of the cast are even aware of the imminent danger they're all in, or if they're just smiling through the pain. Because sure enough, eventually you're pulled into an alternate dimension, Persona style, where you get a very basic combat tutorial and fight a boss where you and your companions are near instantly killed. This is where the titular loop enters the picture, as when you die you are sent back to the first day of August, and from here the game abandons its duty of care and leaves you awash in questions and not really sure what's going on. On paper, this isn't the worst intro. It establishes a lot of intriguing world building that seems like it could be fun to uncover more of the mystery of. If you thought that, then I am sorry to inform you that the story has now exited the building, because that's basically all the plot you're getting for the rest of the entire game. Yep, if you were hoping for more core story beats that would flesh out that premise, then you're shit out of luck, pal, because Loop8's core story more or less ceases to exist at this point. You are now set loose in the town of Ashihara to do... something. This is the main problem with the intro, namely that it does a pretty piss-poor job of actually preparing you for what Loop8's core gameplay loop, actually is. So, let's get to that. The first play experience of Loop8 is a confusing one, where you spend your first couple of days talking to characters and maybe using the couple of stat-increasing objects the tutorial introduced you to. You will notice at this point the conversation system is somehow both extremely complicated and incredibly shallow. Let me explain. Theoretically, tons of factors influence your success in trying to make friends. Both characters' stats, the room's mood, a mechanic I still don't precisely understand. Nini is the man with a plan. The mood has become romantic, and that means Benny just walked in the room. The mood became unromantic! No, they all walked in first. Damn it. Guys, you're ruining the mood! The character's current mood, which changes totally erratically and without warning, and what they were just doing, but in reality what it all boils down to is mashing through these dialogue boxes over and over again to make these numbers go up. Sometimes you'll cross some threshold and they'll offer up some more personal detail about themselves and gain a blessing which increases stats permanently and persists across loops. Sometimes when you approach a character, they will activate an event with no warning, where you teleport halfway across town while they pour their heart out to you, or suddenly confess their love to you in a way that feels jarring and unearned, given that this can happen shockingly quickly if you just stand in one place and talk to a single character for a while. All of this results in a social interaction system that feels completely without substance. You mash through the generic dialogue prompts like, get to know better, or compliment to make the number go up, and that's basically your lot. These interactions constitute the bulk of gameplay in Loop8, so that's not a great start. You may also set about trying to increase your stats via specific spots, but the game only introduces you to like 2 of them. Every stat has an associated training spot, but you're just supposed to stumble onto most of them. It took me like 6 hours before I worked out you increase divine power by using this goddamn broom over here. Stat increasing is also a case of mashing through the prompt and then the number goes up, which is deeply boring but important to do because it is the only meaningful way you have to influence combat success. Speaking of which... roughly a couple of in-game days after you gain complete control in earnest, you are notified by way of a vision that the Kegai have broken into the real world and have possessed a character. You're intended to use these visions as hints to determine who, but a better tell is just noticing who stands in one place and doesn't move all day, because once a character is decided, they won't shift position. The chosen character is completely random, and once you figure out who it is, talk to them and you'll get a little cutscene of them having a moment, and the portal to the alternate dimension opens and you have until the end of a 5-day deadline to defeat a boss or the world ends. So, gather your party and venture forth, right? No! Stupid! You thought you could just get a party, like what the tutorial showed happening? You stinky. For you see, characters will not join you in combat against the world-ending threat that everyone knows is there until you become friends with them first. This is stupid on face value and works against the game's own introduction to this concept, but better still, it is almost impossible to talk to characters in Loop8 and not raise your affection stat alongside your friendship value. So what will happen is you'll talk to characters in hopes of raising their relationship so you can actually have some backup in the combat, but shockingly quickly they'll decide you're dating all of a sudden, usually with you being unceremoniously teleported halfway across town to have some kind of dramatic event where they confess to you. Or pour their heart out in like a non-gay way if you picked a guy. Except for the one character who actually does come out as bisexual all of a sudden in this process, which kind of genuinely caught me off guard, and I almost mashed past this because Loop8 trains you to mash through reams and reams of repeated generic dialogue. To the point where you're at risk of accidentally mashing through what little character development it occasionally fastballs at your head. Also, God, don't talk to people near doorways or entrances in this game because the sudden event teleportation is prone to ridiculous occurrences like this where a character spawns into the scene while you're mashing through someone else's dialogue, intercepting your talk action and spiriting you across the game world for a heart-to-heart. I love this clip so much, dude. This game is so ridiculous. Look at this. Beautiful intercept. Wonderful. Anyway. You've made a handful of girlfriends and maybe one boyfriend who will fight with you. Great. Except in my case, I pretty much exclusively used the fox girl Benny in combat if I used anyone at all, so you're probably not going to see anyone else in the battle footage, sorry. I'm not into the whole polygamy thing and my allegiances stand accordingly. So now, gather your party. In my case, just pick up my fox girlfriend and venture forth into Yomotsu Hirasaka, which as it turns out is a palette-swapped version of the regular town, but you can't fast travel around it, and you will at this point be forced to confront the painfully slow walking speed. Normally this isn't a big deal because you can fast travel between the major locations, but the purple dimension forces you to walk between every screen transition to navigate, and odds are good you'll waste a lot of time even trying to understand how all the screens fit together, because there's no real reason not to just fast travel in the regular game world, but on a basic level, it's just way too slow. This game runs on a persistent in-game clock too, so this makes that balancing act infinitely harder to manage for reasons we'll get back to. Your actual goal in the off-brand Dark Hour is to collect Magatamas from these weird orbs. These are almost always just a stat check. If you have enough of a stat, you receive the Magatama. No thought required, it will take place automatically. Sometimes it makes you do a fight against normal enemies, and now we can finally talk the actual combat system. So, firstly, you may have been under the impression that this game was something like a Persona game, where half your time is spent on the social interaction and the other half on the combat, but this is incorrect. This game is actually maybe 5% combat tops. Combat in this game is conducted in a turn-based fashion by picking which skill to attack with, which each costing a different amount of energy from you, the blue bar. The green bar is stamina, and that's your health. But the unique rub of Loop8's combat is that you can choose a feeling to attach to your attack. The way it's explained is that hate is the strongest emotion, but can power up your enemies with bad juju. Affection is weak, but can depower them, and friendship is just kind of the all-around pick. In practice, this is completely irrelevant for standard combat because it doesn't last long enough for these to matter. Your party members act automatically, which as we all know is an extremely popular and well-received choice in turn-based role-playing games. But honestly, this matters surprisingly little. Both you and your companions have so few options to begin with that you don't really need to worry about them picking the wrong one. You don't really have status effects or debuffs or elemental affinities or whatever to worry about. Functionally, all you need to do is pick your strongest move and wail on dudes until they go away. And they will, because the standard enemy is pathetically weak. And when I say the standard enemy, I meant that singular, because this is it. This is the only normal enemy in the entire game. They made one. This is a 20-hour game. Oh sure, as you go through the game it gets recolored, but there's still only one standard enemy in the entire game. Cool. So you win the fight because you'll never die to the standard enemy and receive a Magatama. This is the only circumstance under which you will ever need to do a standard battle, and notably you get no other reward for combat. There's no random battles otherwise, and the only way to initiate combat is to intentionally talk to one of the shadows wandering around, and that will trigger a combat. But there's no experience system or standard leveling up, so there's absolutely no point to doing this. I've read you can apparently receive blessings from these fights, but I've never ever seen this happen, and it's an incredibly inefficient way to go about it anyway, so there's just absolutely no reason to ever engage normal combat unless actively forced to in the process of Magatama collection. So, screw that, proceed to the boss gate. You need the Magatamas you collected to open a boss gate. The number you need increases as the game goes on, but it's never any larger than 6, so very often you can get here without doing a standard fight at all. Your health and stamina are automatically restored to full on breaking open a boss gate, so if you thought you might need to manage your energy in the standard battles by not constantly firing off your strongest moves, then no, incorrect. That would be gameplay, and Loop8 is allergic to any kind of interesting JRPG mechanics. And, well, the boss fights don't fare much better, tactically speaking. The draw with these is that your current relationship with the possessed character affects combat, but combat in Loop8 is basically decided before it even starts, due to the fact you have almost no meaningful tactical options. If the possessed character hates you, they become stronger and use more powerful attacks and buff themselves. If they like you, the fight becomes easier. But you can't really overcome a difficult starting position with clever tactics. Either you raise the relationships and your own personal stats well enough to win by mashing your moves into their face, or you didn't, and winning is functionally impossible. The range of possibilities here is just too narrow. Boss fights are either an embarrassing stomp where you one or two shot the opposing enemy because your parameters check out, or they grind you down in a boring mess that signals your doom and the need to loop to try again with stat raising. There is absolutely no fight in this game that requires a more thoughtful approach. They're essentially all fancy stat checks. Little reason is given to do anything other than pick your strongest move over and over again to win. If you have the stats, it'll work. If you don't, well, time to loop. The game gives you the ability to see both the boss's and your allies' next move in an effort to help you make informed decisions about how to play combat, but there are two fatal flaws with this. Firstly, you have such limited combat options that this information isn't very useful, and the most you can do with this is block a hit for an ally if they single target them instead of you. If they all target, you can't really meaningfully interact with that anyway. The second is that they don't actually show you the move they're going to do. It shows you the voice line they will speak as they perform the move, which is exactly as confusing as it sounds. It's unclear what "now you will fear the dead" means, even with a target specified. Is it a debuff, a stun, a regular attack? Loop8 provides no help with this, making move prediction a good idea implemented in a near useless fashion, so once again you're back to just bringing the bigger number to the fight and winning that way. At the end of a fight, if you have a high enough relationship with the possessed character, you can save their life. If not, Nini will automatically kill them, removing them from the game for that loop. If you bring a party member with you and they run out of stamina in combat, they are also killed and do not come back. There is no recoverable KO state. Falling in combat is death for that character. And with the boss defeated and the character maybe saved or not, you're teleported out of the Midnight Channel, upon which a new 5-day timer will begin for the next possessed character. And that's it. That's the game. Repeat this process 6 times and then you will receive an ending. This core premise doesn't evolve or deviate or have additional complications layered onto it. What you do in the first week is the same as what you'll do in the last one. Your goal, broadly speaking, is to make it to the end of the game with everyone still alive. You will probably spend your first loop and thusly roughly your first 6 or 7 hours with the game just getting to grips with how all this crap even works, because the game doesn't explain this anywhere near as concretely as I just have. Thus, with all of this established, Loop8 is a game where you spend almost all of your time mashing through stat-raising prompts and generic dialogue to increase your number so that your number is large enough to defeat the next stat check. I would say this game generously has about maybe 5 hours of actual content in it. It took me 15 hours to complete. And that's apparently relatively fast, probably just because looking up stuff for this game was easier in Japanese than in English. So, moment-to-moment gameplay is basically just spent looking for any way to increase relevant numbers. One way to do this that the game tells to you, in a characteristically not very well explained fashion early on, is by collecting blessings. The game tries to make out like these are given for a variety of activities, but I only ever seem to receive blessings via exactly 2 methods. The first was mentioned, talking to characters and seeing their unique dialogues, although these tend to raise their stats rather than yours. Incidentally, non-combat characters can receive combat stats via these blessings, and I still don't know what this is for other than confusing me. The second method is by checking particular locations in the game world, upon which you will be treated to an overly long animation of the squirrel popping out and talking your ear off. This will happen actually hundreds of times over the course of the game, and fortunately you can disable this animation from the menu, which I did so almost immediately. Although even the fucking menu is done poorly, because for some reason you have to set blessings to on, which means you have turned on blessing animation skip, rather than setting the animations to off. Confused? I was too. Oh no, editing Punchy interlude. It turns out they actually patched the game at some point to make this clearer. I tried to get clean footage of this without my webcam and found that it was different, so I ended up having to use my old stream footage instead, but it was definitely confusing before. Okay, thank you. Back to the video. There's also a similar options for battle animations, but this one appears to actually just flat out not work. I don't know, maybe it is abridging them in some way, it didn't seem like it made any difference for me. Now, searching for blessings sounds like a fine mechanic on paper. Explore the game world, receive bonuses. Sure. But the locations for the blessings are all fixed, and while it'll take you a bit to figure out where all the spots are, it's trivial to just run the rounds of every blessing spot in an in-game day, because the blessings refresh on each in-game day. So every single day, you'll run the daily rounds of touching every one of these spots to gain free stats. Very engaging. The thrill of exploration runs through the Loop8. But it's important to do this, since as established, gaining stats is the only thing that matters in Loop8. In fact, it's pretty much the only thing you can do, period. If you're not raising a relationship value or raising a stat, then there's nothing else to really do. The last saving throw here is that maybe the characters are in fact interesting to talk to and have unique stories to tell, and oh boy, this is where the real insanity starts. As a broad rule, every character has exactly one personality trait unique to them, and the shared trait of becoming instantly overly familiar with the protagonist if you talk to them for a few minutes. So let's go through some of the joyous character beats I experienced over the course of the playthrough in no particular order. Firstly, there's Konoha. She's your cousin and fulfills the role of introducing you to the town. If you repay her kindness with somewhat basic affability, she will very quickly decide you are dating with this dialogue prompt where you have no option to say no. She will later teleport you to the shrine and attempt to kiss you. You having the option to decline is one of the only moments of romantic agency you can actually demonstrate in Loop8, which of course I do because seriously, cousin! Stop that. Why are you like this? Oh my god, what is wrong with this? Next character. Next we have Ichika. She's some kind of god-slaying priestess who often states she is going to cease to exist after you've eliminated the threat of the Kegai. This doesn't really seem to bother her especially much, nor does the game seem to want to dwell on the emotional toll of that, so I won't either. Loop8 is very good at coming up with decent ideas for character beats and then doing absolutely nothing with them. This will be a running theme. She somehow engages in an even more egregious breach of romantic etiquette than Konoha if you talk to her too much, because she doesn't simply decide you're dating, no. She decides you're now married to her and will actually start calling you husband in dialogue. This again happens with no ceremony, but at least she's not your cousin, so this is probably an improvement on balance. There's Benny, a fox goddess. She doesn't really have an arc, and her one personality trait is being a tsundere, but I also think she's somehow got the most normal romance because all that really happens is that she says she likes you and that's it. The fact that this is the least bewildering romantic subplot speaks volumes. She's the character I spent most of my time with, mainly because she freaked me out the least. And the last of the girl combatants, Machina. She is a robot created by Max, one of the school teachers, to fight the Kegai. There is absolutely no introduction to this concept. It is very easy to mistake her talk of energy level and charging up as just a quirky manner of speech. She was created in the image of Max's deceased little sister because his family died in a Kegai attack and he's still not over it, with Makina having reservations about being created as a replacement for a lost loved one, and Max having his own guilt about enforcing that on what is now essentially his own daughter. Sounds pretty heavy, right? Like, that's something. It sounds almost good when I put it that way. This potential is naturally squandered in Loop8's two traditional ways in that firstly, they both come out with this at a startling pace, and secondly, if you talk to both enough, Makina eventually builds up the courage to tell you that she's going to confront Max about this. And the next day if you talk to her, the game describes to you, in text, that she gives you a thumbs up and your internal monologue remarks, seems like it went well. You don't get to see the cool character moment that this could have been for yourself and feel a sense of payoff. Oh, no. That is not the wavelength that Loop8 operates on. You get the vague implication that all tension was resolved off camera and everything's fine now. This is extremely typical for Loop8, but that's probably the worst example of it that I ran into. Why is this not shown? Unbelievable. Now the pair of male combatants. You have Hori, he calls you dad for some reason. I never really worked out what his deal was. He was kind of the last person I maxed, so I was checked out by the time I got around to him, sorry. But Saru. Saru is the empty-headed bro-type character, but as I mentioned earlier, he's also the one who just suddenly comes out as bisexual if you keep talking to him, and I think this might be the single instance of Loop8's tendency to resolve a character's internal struggles off-camera actually working to its benefit. Because he begins to act pensive about something, and you don't really know what, and then the next day he just comes out, he's like, yeah, I like dudes. And I was like, huh. Fair enough, man, me too. It's still not deep or complex writing, don't get me wrong, but this being presented so casually kinda caught me off guard. I'm hesitant to praise this too much, because as we've seen, this is just how Loop8 handles everything, and this is in fact the only interesting thing there is to say about Saru. Let's rattle through the remainder of the non-combatants real quick. You have Nanachi, he's an anime nerd with no self-esteem, that's genuinely all he gets, no arc for the nerd. Terasu, who inexplicably possesses the ability to forcibly cause a time loop on command. Her ability to do this is never really adequately introduced or even explained. I can't remember if the game even informs you that it exists, or if you're expected to just stumble onto it. She is later revealed to be the player character's grandmother despite her young appearance because time passes differently in space or something. You can still date her, because Loop8 is incredibly fucking weird. Kuni, your homeroom teacher who is very serious about education, you can also date her because, see above. Takako, a precocious elementary schooler, and you'll never guess, but yes, she's also a dateable NPC. An elementary schooler. Very cool, thank you. Moving on. And let's take a moment to address the main character as well in this, Nini. Despite having a very well-defined backstory per the game's narrative, he is a completely silent protagonist with no personality. Presumably you are intended to project yourself onto this. This is not necessarily uncommon in JRPGs, sure, but it is particularly frustrating in a game supposedly all about connecting with the characters that your lead never has any input on anything. It feels like characters talk at Nini rather than with him, and while sometimes you may get a choice of two dialogue options at various points, you can almost never actually express any kind of firm preference this way, which is what leads Nini to get railroaded into so many of these awful romance options. Persona makes this kind of relatively taciturn but still expressive main character look incredibly easy, and Loop8 is here to demonstrate that actually, no it is not. And look, I know I've been comparing this game to Persona a fair bit, I promise I have played other RPGs, it just so happens that Persona really is one of the more apt comparisons given the game's central mechanics. You're just gonna have to put up with it this time. Both games are about as apt to include very obviously bad romance options though. For a palate cleanser, how about we date Michi instead, the shy bookworm of the class? None of these characters really have much more depth than the one trait I have described to you, but at least Michi is just like a classmate, you know? That's relatively normal compared to... So Michi kills you if you try to romance her. Sort of. The game doesn't allude to this or explain that she's going to do this at all. The first time it happened, it actually startled the shit out of me because it's incredibly loud. What happens is that after your affection with Michi has increased past a certain point, she will instantly kill you if you talk to her. Unless you use your demon eye power to check on her mood. She will only kill you if she's in either a good or indulgent mood, and this is something you just have to work out via trial and error. But the mood of characters changes on a dime, so it's very possible for her to suddenly flip into a good mood while you're trying to mash through dialogue and suddenly meet a game over. And it's a special game over too, it kicks you to the title screen, it doesn't cause a loop or anything like any other death. Why is it like this? I have no idea. So your only option for increasing Michi's relationship is to constantly save after every successful conversation with her, because you will sometimes get caught out by her sudden mood swings into instant death. Doesn't matter how many people you're near, if she's in high spirits, you can't talk to her, she will insta-give you on the spot. And you will need to contend with this, because like I said, relationship values help you win against boss fights, and Michi is one of the possible random candidates to turn into a boss, so it is to your advantage in combat to have her be as friendly as possible. On that note, let's make like the namesake and loop back around to the process of actually completing this game and receiving what can be generously called its ending. So the way my first loop of this game ended was as I described, struggling to get the sense of the game, eventually smacking into a boss I had no realistic chance of beating. They would perform very devastating debuff moves that essentially meant I did no damage. I had no idea what to do about this in the moment, which was extremely frustrating. The answer, as it turns out, is that bosses get access to combat-ruiningly strong debuffs if their hatred towards you is too high, a process that happens largely invisibly off-screen, so unless you're checking the menu a lot you might not notice. So, screwed this up, we die, and now armed with much of the previous info about how this game works, I set out to actually attempt to clear the game. The first thing I noticed on this second attempt is that looping, despite being the central mechanic the game pretends to be designed around to point where it's in the title, actually kind of sucks. Strike one is that it serves no narrative function. Nobody remembers the time loop, not even the protagonist, not that I imagine he would have much to say about it even if he did. So the nature of an eternally looping August isn't really a factor in the actual story. That's kind of disappointing right off the bat. Strike 2 is that while you and other characters keep any stat boosts earned from finding blessings, otherwise all of your stats and relationships are reset. The upshot is that these values will increase twice as fast up to your previous highest value, so it functionally halves the amount of required mashing through menus needed to increase numbers, provided you mashed through them the first time. That's lovely and all, good for it, but it's still mashing through the same menus. Strike 3 for the loop system is that every single piece of dialogue you ever receive from a character will repeat on a new loop. Every single one. This is particularly bad with Benny, who the first time you talk to her will explain over about literally a dozen individual conversations the basic premise and thread of the Kegai, and you'll have to perform the mash-through text mumbo to get back to the normal dialogue menu and start raising stats again. But it's actually worse than that, because if you carried forward any blessings that increase the relationship value, dialogue events that trigger due to said value will also all start piling up in sequence, so if you accumulated a fair bit, something that isn't that unreasonable to do, you will have to mash through all of their triggered dialogue and possibly their cutscenes before you can just finally normally talk to them again. This adds up to an unbelievable amount of redundant and wasted time when looping, and just further reinforces the player instinct to not pay attention to anything anyone is saying, because 90% of it is going to be stuff you've already seen before. This all leads me to the depressing conclusion that, again, despite it being the thing for which the game is named, Loop8 isn't really designed around the concept of its time loop any more than, say, Dead Rising or Lightning Returns are designed around their New Game Plus modes, because that's essentially what looping is. A cumbersome and marginally narratively justified New Game Plus that only seems to exist because otherwise the game is so confusing and boring that it is almost guaranteed that nobody would finish it if you couldn't carry some of your stats forward to make it easier, since it neither serves the game on a narrative or mechanical level otherwise. Games like Noja have Loop8 so beat in this regard, a game where the time loop is integrated into the core gameplay and narrative in a very natural and graceful way, and Noja doesn't even advertise itself as a time loop game. Dead Rising's implementation also feels particularly worth noting here, because that is also a game where it's challenging to complete on your first attempt, but due to its constantly time-based nature where the state of the game world is always changing whether you're there to witness it or not, it feels rewarding to replay and learn new things, do better, try to see different events, and save more people. It feels weird to be bringing up Dead Rising while discussing a JRPG, but I had to do something to throw off the Persona comparisons. But the main thing is that the reason Dead Rising is worth replaying is the very alive-feeling space that moves on the real clock. Loop8 also moves on a clock with an in-game calendar, so how does it fare there? Well, poorly, naturally. There isn't anything that actually happens in the game world according to the clock outside of Tartarus opening up when a character gets possessed. Damn it, the Persona came back. I'm not entirely convinced the characters actually follow a schedule. They sort of pretend to. The most I can confirm is that characters definitely make some attempt to go to school in the morning, even if it's a weekend and the school isn't actually in session, so I don't think it has any way to discern the day of the week. Otherwise, characters just seem to roam about the map at random. The fact that I could not tell if characters were following some kind of elaborate schedule or if they simply drift between areas at random should probably say it all for how successful this mechanic is. Characters do make some attempt to move between areas even while they're in the same area as you rather than standing around, but this is unfortunately subject to the AI pathfinding not being great. The pathfinding in this game is really something. Like, it doesn't matter very much, but I think it might honestly be better if they would just, like, stand still, you know? After class is a fantastic example of this clusterfuck that almost everyone will experience playing this game, as it packs NPCs into a small room who then all try to leave it at the same time. This happens so frequently after attending class that I cannot possibly believe it wasn't a known problem in development. Further weirdness occurs when school closes at 7 PM, because for some reason very often huge clusters of characters will just gather at the gates and stand there like cultists well past closing time. So everyone was at school, but school is shut. Why do people keep doing this? Why does everyone keep standing outside the gates at like 7 PM? It's fucking creepy. I have no idea why they do this. It's super creepy. This cannot possibly be working right. Fortunately, characters aren't hard to locate despite this, because the map will just tell you where everyone is at any given moment. Usually. I've found sometimes it's wrong and characters just aren't where the game says they are. I thought this might be because time passes slightly when you fast travel and maybe they move locations during that time frame, but no, sometimes you can check the map while in a location and the game will say a character is in that same location, but they will just not be there. Because truly, nothing comes for free in Loop 8. Everything is a struggle and nothing just works as you'd expect it to. So, starting from a fresh new loop, you have about 2 days before the game randomly picks a target for Kegai possession. So if you're trying to save everyone, your first 2 days in a new loop are this frantic clusterfuck of trying to make friends with all the non-combatant characters, because 2 days is not a lot of time to work with. And if the game rolls the one character you hadn't spoken to yet, oops, they're probably dead straight away. What fun. This is actually how my second attempt failed almost instantly. It just randomly picked the one character out of the possibilities I hadn't spoken to, so I very quickly abandoned that loop, having essentially had 2 hours of my life wasted by an unfortunate dice roll. Frantically beavering away on the third loop, I managed to make friends with all of the boss candidates rapidly, ensuring their continued survival over the playthrough. Except for Tarasu, because despite being a non-combatant, she isn't a boss candidate and is essentially a red herring because Loop 8 hates you, personally. Once you've got the non-combatant relationship situated, the only other thing you have to do to ensure everyone's survival is not having anyone die in combat. It turns out this is best achieved by not bringing anyone into combat in the first place. Because, as it turns out, boss HP scales based off the number of party members you bring into the fight, which has the effect of making it never actually worth it to bring a party member with you into combat. Their stats are unlikely to be as high as yours, and if Nini dies, the game ends anyway. So if you're not strong enough, it doesn't really matter how strong your party is. The absolute best possible outcome of bringing a party member is that they'll make the fight take longer due to the increased health bar. Many a time when I struggled and barely failed to defeat a boss on my first loop, I was able to progress by simply removing people from the party and trying with Nini on his own. So much for the power of friendship, eh? And since increasing your own stats is merely a process of clicking through menus, and the cap isn't even spectacularly high, on a winning attempt you will very rapidly find yourself running out of things to do. By Loop 3, I managed to one-shot the first 2 bosses flat out, and by about the halfway point of the game calendar, I had maxed out every single relationship value and all my stats, and if you can manage that, the game might as well roll the credits then, because that's it. Increasing those values is the game. With everything at max, there's genuinely nothing else for you to do except proceed to the ending. I wasted as much time as I could seeing all of Benny's date events because I am nothing if not committed to my chosen, despite the game's best efforts to force a harem onto me, but even those eventually completely run out. I was genuinely wasting entire in-game days by just immediately going to bed to advance the in-game clock forward because there was literally nothing else I could have done with that time. So I mindlessly bowl over the remaining 3 bosses completely unchallenged, and thus the final Kegai possession is revealed. Konoha. Konoha is always the final target, and the final deadline is also always the end of August, so if you completed some boss fights ahead of schedule, this is where you could regain that lost time for stat training. Because yeah, I didn't mention this earlier, but if you defeat a boss ahead of the 5-day deadline, you just lose the remaining time and it immediately starts another 5-day timer. So you're actively incentivized to defeat bosses at the last possible second, which sucks and is hard to do because you move very, very slowly in the TV world. Not that this extra time helps me very much with my already maxed stat line, and I generally think if you can get this far in the first place, you probably don't need the extra time. It is nice you can go end the game early at this point. You don't have to wait to the end of August to go fight the final boss. Now, before we proceed to the ending and I have my last laugh, I want to single out a couple of things for some qualified praise as a palate cleanser. Firstly, I think art style-wise, this game doesn't actually look half bad. It's going for a kind of Japanese animated feature film type look, and I think in the town exploration segments, it mostly has that look down. I wouldn't say it's a very large or impressive space, and there's not a lot to see, but the vibe is on point at least. Outside of combat anyway. Inside of combat, the limited frame rate put on character animations for what I presume are aesthetic reasons make the game a bit headache-inducing to look at. So, a bit mixed, but good effort at least. Secondly, the localization is trying so hard to make this script good. In my entirely non-professional but bilingual opinion, it's a surprisingly well punched up script, managing to get some solidly weighty turns of phrase out of it, and it rarely falls back on overused translationisms, which must have been quite tempting to do given how extremely blatantly culturally Japanese the game is. I commend, but I also weep for the doubtlessly talented translation team who worked on this one, because the writing still isn't good because you can only do so much with bad source material, but this is a surprisingly high-effort translation that even somehow got an English dub that I forgot existed, so I don't have any footage of it, sorry. Something I find all the more surprising, given how the rest of the game didn't seem to have a lot of money to work with. Y'all had the budget for an English dub, but not for a second standard enemy type? That's crazy, man. Still, I salute the translation team for trying their level best with this one. You are noticed and appreciated. Okay, back to the ending. So the final boss is Konoha's possessed form. It becomes a bit depressingly obvious at this point that Konoha is considered the canon love interest for the game, which as previously discussed is gross and weird because she is your cousin. I know the game themes itself around Shinto deities and myths, and the gods famously didn't really care about that kind of thing, but I do care, and that's uncomfortable as hell, thank you. So anyway, you fight her. This plays out identically to any other boss fight in this game. If you're expecting anything fancy or dramatic or just anything different at all for the conclusion of the game, then nope, you're not getting it. I defeat Konoha because at this point my max stat line makes failure functionally impossible, and you get 3 choices. The third one is only available if everyone has survived up to this point and is thus the true ending. If people are dead, you'd be forced to only pick between either saving the world or saving Konoha alone, but in the true ending you're able to stop the loop by cutting this thread, I guess. And Konoha also doesn't die because I don't know. There's no real rhyme or reason to this, it's just kind of everything works out because you did good at the video game. Way to go, champ. The loop is stopped and Nini and Konoha leave Ashihara to go gallivanting around the world as a couple. They are still cousins, so I still hate this. This unlocks Konoha's epilogue from the main menu, which is a still image where Konoha talks for like 10 actual unbroken minutes straight about how in love she is with her cousin. Great! Good! Can I get an ending where I don't fuck my cousin? Let's try again! I hate this true ending. What if I destroy the world and, oh god damn it, even with no world there's still cousin fucking? Why is this game so committed to this? Stop it! Get help, man! Okay, back up and kill Konoha for the third ending. If Konoha is dead, there is no possibility of ending up with her. But this is considered the bad ending, and this ending had me in fucking stitches the first time I saw it. Just this cross-fading across monochrome environments because Nini is sad he can't fuck his cousin. This looks like a shitpost, man! I can't believe that feel when no cousin fucking. Oh, I felt my bones crack from standing up. I am not a fit person. Holy shit. Okay, what was I talking about again? Right, yes, and that's it. Even if you kill Konoha, I somehow still didn't manage to end up with any of the other characters. This game is really, really insistent about this being the canon pairing. Supposedly there are character endings, but I don't have any idea how you get them, considering all I did this entire playthrough was hang out with Benny. I even reloaded, maxed out my hatred with Konoha, and retried with Benny in the party in the hopes that that would at least change the ending to someone else, and still I got nothing. Past a certain point, you can't actually lower relationship value, so if you max Konoha, apparently you are committed to the cousin fucker ending, because that is just the wavelength that Loop8 operates on. This blows, man. So I did what any disgruntled gamer does, I looked up the other endings on YouTube. Nothing remarkable, I don't even really think they're worth showing, they're single short conversations with a character. Although the max epilogue does use this incredible still for its narration, which is unironically fantastic. This also looks like a shitpost. And that's it! That's Loop8! You unlock New Game Plus at this juncture, and I had to Google a Japanese wiki to even figure out what this did, but apparently it starts the game with relationship values at random levels. Riveting. So overall, Loop8 is in a very elite class of bad. On no level do its mechanics work together, it seems dysfunctional at the core design level, it's often very boring to slog through with its repetitive and insipid method of stat raising, and its characters are one-note, and it's got an utterly bizarre insistence on terrible, terrible romantic couplings. Now, I nevertheless enjoyed myself as the sheer fascination of how messed up this game managed to get took over, but I would definitely struggle to recommend this to people without that kind of brain poison. I wouldn't really recommend it at all, obviously, but this video is an anti-recommendation of sorts, but also a call to any fellow Kusoge enthusiasts out there. In a year that has blessed us with such magnificent garbage as The Lord of the Rings Gollum and Redfall, Loop8 managed to mostly escape notice by way of its relative obscurity. I don't expect this video to change that, but I do hope I have enlightened and amused you with this recounting of an experience with a truly, incredibly bad JRPG. Definitely one of the worst of all time. Hey, thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this video, leave a like, comment, and consider subscribing to the channel. Additionally, check out the Patreon because making videos is time-consuming and the YouTube algorithm highly unpredictable. I'd also love to hear your suggestions for other truly terrible JRPGs to cover if this is the sort of thing you like hearing about. I'm fascinated by it myself, so I'd love to do this again sometime, if I can find some good material to work with. Once again, thanks for watching. Let's do this again sometime. Bye bye.
「正しいことよりらしいこと」